Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 161. On this week's episode of the podcast, I will be reviewing Darren Aronofsky's latest film, Caught Stealing, starring Austin Butler, Regina King, Zoe Kravitz, and Matt Smith. As this is a film review, there will be a non-spoiler section of the review, as well as a spoiler section, and then I will be responding to Question of the Week listener mail. Time codes will be listed in the description, so there's no need to worry if you haven't had a chance to see the film yet. Let's jump into Caught Stealing, no spoilers. If you're somebody who is a passionate film fan, you might find it interesting that this is Darren Aronofsky's next movie. He's somebody who is known for a particular, I wouldn't even say style, but tone with his films. They're very psychological and they tend to be very, very serious. From Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan, The Wrestler. Noah was maybe a diversion into something much more of a religious spectacle. And then Mother, of course, and a serious drama with The Whale, which of course won Brendan Fraser his Academy Award. Caught Stealing was really interesting. I wasn't familiar with the film at all. I had only seen the trailers for it, which I was completely unaware of, and it really gave me a vibe similar to the early Guy Ritchie films, but set in America. I know there is a lot of films specifically within Scorsese's catalog that you could see influences from just in the marketing of the movie in general. The first thing that I really noticed, and I was so grateful for, is that Caught Stealing gives us an opportunity to see more of Austin Butler's range and his versatility throughout the projects he's been in, whether that be Elvis, Dune, and now this. I'm really curious to see what he picks next. Being the leading man in this story, which to me more than anything, if you're a fan of the British crime films that are much more grounded in nature, there's always some sort of twist that unfolds as you're watching the movie. This really did remind me of Rock and Rolla, which is not one of the films that a lot of people would have seen. It starred a ton of incredible stars back in the early 2000s with Gerard Butler, Tom Wilkinson, Thandie Newton, Tom Hardy, Toby Kebbell, Idris Elba. It is a star-studded cast, and it's maybe one of Guy Ritchie's lesser-known films, but in the way that this movie evolves was much more similar, and that's a good thing, quite frankly, because there's a system in place and an expectation in those other films, and it can be hard to evaluate something that feels familiar. One of the aspects of this movie that I really appreciated was it didn't go for a time period or an aesthetic that I would say had been overused. An example could be drawn to something like Joker, which went for that grimy 70s New York when it was arguably at its worst, but setting this when they do in the 90s and just really getting to show multiple different aspects of living in that world. And of course, New York is a real place. It's a tangible location. And the practicality of shooting movies like this, which is in a much smaller budget, in $40 million, and making it a character-focused journey throughout the underbelly of crime within New York. And these movies only work when you have compelling characters. And thankfully, this movie does that. The cast is stacked. I already mentioned Austin Butler, but Regina King, Zoe Kravitz, Matt Smith, Liev Schreiber, Vincent D'Onofrio, Griffin Dunne, who I know Griffin Dunne from playing the older Nikki in This Is Us, which I found quite comical, and then Carol Kane, who's popping up in all sorts of stuff. I was watching Poker Face with my wife. We were finishing season 2, and she shows up in that. Most people may know her now from stuff like Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt or Star Trek Strange New Worlds, because she's amazing and her relationship with the character she interacts with are really entertaining. This movie is slightly hard to talk about just because we know that our main character of Henry Hank Thompson, played by Austin Butler, gets wrapped in this sort of evolving crime world because of his relationship with Matt Smith's character. And another thing that I shouldn't be skipping over at all is that I'm really happy with how Matt Smith has chosen his roles as a theatrical actor, just to have such a wide range of things. Last Night in Soho, The Forgiven, to being the only person in Morbius who understood the assignment at all, and then Starve Acre, and now this, and it's been recently announced he's going to be in Star Wars Starfighter. Just such a wide aspects of projects that have next to nothing to do with each other. And he really reminded me, ironically enough, of one of the mutant gang members from The Dark Knight Returns. And I know that is an influence from the 80s and the 90s punk era, but that was just on my mind watching this. And to have somebody like that be the crux and the ignition for this fire that sort of starts throughout Austin Butler Hank's life because of the consequences of just one, hey, can you watch my cat, is really comical. But the movie doesn't shy away from serious things, which is getting a character who is sort of just thriving at the bottom rung of life because of the consequences of something in his past, and getting an opportunity to evaluate that based on what is happening in the moment, not having the opportunity to run away from anything. Well, physically you are doing so, emotionally you are unable to do that because you have this quite literal problem in human beings as well as exterior forces closing in on you. It prevents the character from having an opportunity to really let go of anything and be confronted with something that he might not have let go of. And the movie may be slightly heavy-handed in the way that we evaluate Hank's past, but from an imagery standpoint, it does a really good job of settling in on specifically what Hank has been running from and why he is where he is in his life. The back and forth with Austin Butler and Zoe Kravitz is really entertaining. I think it's awesome to show two characters who are just together in the moment while still have this chemistry that is palpable on screen. And you need those dynamics to work because when you have such a small insular world, which we are presented with those two characters and where they go to their jobs, they go back and they, in the trailer, which unfortunately I won't be able to use in the podcast because it has a licensed song. And unfortunately, because this is a smaller budget movie and we are approaching the end of August, there's not a ton of marketing materials. So you're just going to hear the classic whoosh that used to be before we used clips. So if you're curious as to why that was the case, I'm letting you know right now. And back to the Zoe Kravitz and the Austin Butler of it all. You need that relationship to feel very dynamic and healthy in order to feel the tension build up as Hank is experiencing the gang world. And one thing I really appreciate that sometimes these films often forget to do is to allow for moments of levity to cut through the tension. Because similar to a horror movie, in my opinion, if you are stuck nervous or uneasy or you're just tense because of expecting something to go wrong from a horror standpoint or climactic action, whatever you may be expecting to do and tense up for that, there's no moment of relief when you return to that tension. You need to give the audience and the characters opportunities to decompress for the next serious moment to matter in storytelling. And this movie manages to do so. I'm really happy that you get a movie like this, which is $40 million, which, of course, is not a small amount of money, but when we look at the grand scheme of things in the theatrical realm of films or of media landscape, it is not a big budget blockbuster. I read recently that the budget for Happy Gilmore 2 was somewhere around $200 million, which I think is utterly ridiculous for a streaming comedy, but it is what it is. And a movie being set in a real world location, you need to make that feel lived in and tangible. Using New York and any other areas to make it feel as if this world is lived in is incredibly important, because if at any point you feel as if you're on a set, you lose that small scale interpersonal relationships because you start to be desensitized by this is a movie. where adding that grounded element and momentum throughout the whole thing does matter and makes for an entertaining experience. Are you necessarily going to be blown away by a movie like this? I would say no, but there was an era when we would get one of these every 2 to 5 years, and it's really unfortunate that that seems to be the case, that we don't really. We had Gentlemen on Netflix, and the most recent film, ironically, that I would say remotely fits in with something like this is Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman, which I'm now realizing, because I had to look it up, came out 5 years ago. You give us a group of colorful characters, and anytime they interact in whatever pairing it might be, that's captivating and that's entertaining. I think the movie has some good action in it. It's gripping and it's fun. And it reminded me of an earlier time in theaters, which I'm really grateful for. So that will do it for my non-spoiler thoughts. It's really hard to talk about certain aspects of this film, but I will be able to do that now in spoilers. All right, we are now in spoilers for Caught Stealing, and I can tell you
What happened?
Austin Butler's Hank Thompson was a high-ranked pitcher, or we don't actually know his position, but he was a baseball player who was likely going to be drafted to his favorite team, the San Francisco Giants, and because of drinking and irresponsible driving, got into an accident, hurting his knee and killing his best friend. Because of the trauma of that event, it has led him to living in New York, where he is a barback at a bar, and he has a relationship with somebody he doesn't actually say his girlfriend, but that might just because of the phone call he has with his mom. This is a habit he has, we see throughout the movie, which is he usually calls his mom within 48 hours, and because of the events of the film, he's running into issues being able to do that. His roommate within the building is Russ, as I mentioned already, who is played by Matt Smith, and he has to go away because his dad is sick in England. As a result, Hank is then given the cat to take care of. 24 hours later, things are escalating unbeknownst to Hank. 2 Russian mobsters show up and are looking for Russ. He is assaulted and beat up, resulting in his kidney being ruptured, having to be removed. This being a substantial amount of the film's problem for Hank, which is he is a heavy drinker. And with only one kidney, you need to remove any extra toxins because your kidneys are doing, well, he only has one now, can only do half the work of having 2. Zoe Kravitz is a paramedic. That's relevant to the story. Hank, unbeknownst to him at all, doesn't really know what's going on. He meets Regina King, who is Roman, the detective inspector, not inspector, that's a British thing, Kyle. The detective who is looking into a case that has to do with all the different cultural families in New York because of drugs. Russ was her informant and believes that he knows something and he needs to be looked for. One of the things that I loved about this movie is you think Russ has deliberately screwed these people over, but in fact, he just didn't let anybody know that he had to fly back to England because of his dad's sickness, who did ultimately die, which is quite tragic. And we see he had a tattoo done in honor of him. Russ, because of his relationship with all of the different families, was put in charge of money because of drugs coming into the city. He is the middleman. If you've seen The Dark Knight, it's just like the guy they arrest in Hong Kong. But because Russ didn't tell them he was leaving, all of the families think he has abandoned them all and taken all the money. So unbeknownst to Russ, this is what's happening, which is why everybody is after Hank, because they think that he knows something. He gets tortured by the Puerto Ricans, who is led by Bad Bunny, who I credit him. He has said he wants to take acting classes so that he can improve as an actor. And if you're committed to the craft, buddy, more power to you. I think his relationship with the 2 goons is quite entertaining, and the back and forth between him and Regina King is really fun. That being a twist that I'm going to spoil now, that's revealed later, which is that Regina King's Roman is actually in on it from the beginning. She's the informant helping the families and able to avoid being detected by the cops. Because she's been given the case, it's never going to get solved. And then we get the two Jewish mobsters played by Liev Schreiber and Vincent D'Onofrio. And their back and forth is so wholesome and entertaining. They're said to be these monsters, and we hear that they did terrible things. But the way that they converse with each other, and even when they wind up working with Hank to try to take down Roman and the two Russians, they still have this familial connection. And we even get to see them go to Shabbat, which is where we get to see Carol Kane's character as Bubu, or Bube. I'm mispronouncing this and I apologize. But just having her speak entirely in Yiddish and see that there's something amiss here, but she still does not want to go, she does not want to know. And the back and forth with them on having to do family business, but we're still going to meet our religious obligations is very much something that would be woven into a movie like this. Even though people are doing heinous and terrible things, they still make time for their families, like we've seen in so many other crime TV shows or films, thinking about something like The Sopranos or Goodfellas as prime examples. And the way that Hank just continually has this situation escalate on him. First, he gets beat up by the Russians, thinking he's safe, learns that the key to where the money is actually hidden inside the kitty litter from the cat he was given. And the relationship with Russ's cat starts off as one that's very antagonistic, but he grows to have this love for the cat. And the real escalation of events is somebody kills Zoe Kravitz because of Hank allegedly running away. And the mystery to who is the murderers is one that is played really well. You think it's the Puerto Ricans, and the twist at the very end where it's revealed to be the people we are told is the monsters, because the bullet pathway through her head, the gun charred her temple, which would only happen when the gun is pushed directly against somebody's head. And I like the movie pushing us in a direction to then like Liev and Vincent's characters, because once you find somebody much more accessible from an emotional standpoint, you're less likely to see them as villains. This is why shows like Dexter or Suits, which is not a monster, but when you give us a protagonist who is committing a crime or doing something on the wrong side of good, if you give us compelling reasons for their motivation, you're more likely to want them to succeed. And same can be said for the way that the veil of darkness around the Druckers is pulled away only to be revealed at the climax at the end of the film, which I really appreciate. And getting to have their ending be similar to how Hank hurt himself as the only way to get out of it. And the breadcrumbs that are laid where he needs to drive, they don't wear seatbelts, and just being laid out in front of you, I'm sure I would have noticed if it was something I was looking for, because I like, in retrospective analysis, the way that the car crash Hank was in as a high school student is shown multiple times. That imagery is important because the darkest moment in Hank's life is going to be his saving grace, is essentially an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, that the way he is going to break free from the life he was in previously is the thing that ended his life before. And I like that symmetry, or poetry as George Lucas would put it, in where he's able to escape. The conclusion to his story to me is super funny because he winds up with all this money. Regina King winds up getting killed by the Druckers prior to them being killed in the car accident. And that Hank, after accidentally killing Russ by blunt force trauma to the head, disguises himself as Russ in order to escape. He needs to lie low, but he's going to send his mom some money so that way she's taken care of. And that is the beating heart of the film. Out of the tragedy of losing Zoe Kravitz, Hank still has this tight-knit connection to his mom and his driving force to return to her and the speed bumps along the way. I think this movie's really entertaining. It offers some really awesome, well-executed chase sequences, whether that be on foot or in vehicles, and the action is never used to be epic or gratifying. It is always shown to be brutalist and the worst case scenario for any of the characters. When there is violence, it is meant to be disconcerting and off-putting. And in this world, I think that matters. You can't have action that's awesome, even though it might be happening to characters we want to see undone. Having that brutalist perspective makes each moment when there is gratuitous violence have impact. So all those elements for me really did work in the movie. If you're somebody who grew up with Scorsese or Guy Ritchie, this is definitely worth your time. It's unfortunate that my theatrical going experience for this had about 6 other people in the theater, because I had a good time with this. It's compelling and the comedic moments worked when they're supposed to. As I said in the non-spoilers, they let you decompress before the next serious thing happens. So that will do it for my full spoiler review of Caught Stealing. If you did wind up seeing it, let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Now let's jump into listener mail and question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what is your favorite crime movie? So ambiguous, and I was aware of that, but when you're going into something like this, it's sometimes nice to just have a completely open-ended question. Let's see what we have here. Scotty Cameron writes, crime movies, that's such a wide net. It's hard to say what really counts because so many movies involve crime, but actually aren't considered crime movies. My first instinct is to say Drive, but I'm not sure that really counts. So I'll say Heat because that's such a great movie and inspired so many other great films. We don't get The Dark Knight without Heat. I'll also give shoutouts to The Town, Gone Baby Gone, Public Enemies. Public Enemies was Michael Mann doing a non-fiction Heat. That's really interesting, Scotty, because I don't know if you're aware that they're going to make a Heat 2, which I believe is a prequel to the original, and it's been heavily rumored that Austin Butler would be in the movie, and the only character to me that makes any sense for him to play would be Val Kilmer. I kind of hope that happens because it would be really interesting. And Michael Mann in Heat, it goes without saying, as you said it. It's an incredible film. Dylan of Movies to Watch Before You Die writes in, I don't know about my favorite crime movie, so I'll give you an underrated one. Bookies. From the early 2000s, with Nick Stahl, John Galecki, and Lucas Haas, goes against the mob to start their own sports betting operation. Always remember it being cool. I think I gave my answer in this, which is I love Rock and Rolla and The Gentleman. That era, Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Barrels. If you've not watched those movies, I really think you should check them out. It's very interesting how Guy Ritchie's career has really involved those movies and then has kind of expanded to larger, more grandiose blockbusters. Of course, he did the Sherlock Holmes films, but he also did The Man from U.N.C.L.E., King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, and Aladdin. And I dug Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, but it was next to impossible to watch, which was incredibly annoying. So thank you to everybody who wrote in their question of the week responses. Again, if you haven't seen the movie or you don't necessarily have an answer for question of the week, ask me a question. I love to hear what the listeners have to say. And if you're following Film Realist on any of the social medias and you've seen my rankings or my tier lists or maybe a history of or watch list, and you have something you'd like me to put together, let me know, because there's going to be some open times in the schedule for what I'm going to be posting, so I'd love to hear what the listeners have to say. On to this week's question of the week, inspired by next week's review, which is going to be Dexter Resurrection. I'm curious, what is your favorite television show revival? So a later season that brought the show back, or television reboot, which sometimes is just a reworking of a previous show. So to let me know, you can comment below, you can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can answer directly on Spotify and YouTube. If you haven't yet, please follow the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. If it allows, give a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. The podcast is slowly creeping towards monetization, which would allow me the opportunity to do more fun stuff, which I would love to do. Thank you so much for listening to the Film Realist Podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.